People who quit without notice. What straw broke the camel's back? Story 1. I was a shift lead in a kitchen where none of the management knew anything about back of house. I ran grill, sauté, expo, and oven solo during every peak shift. I ordered trucks, prepped all week for weekend brunch, wrote kitchen schedules, coordinated kitchen cleaning projects, contacted vendors for repairs, and generally ran the kitchens day to day. I was given the keys and started opening 6 days a week. I was working 55+ hours and loving it. I expanded our brunch service to Fridays as well as Saturday and Sunday, and I come up with an early week menu to use up leftover brunch items and minimize waste. I helped grow weekly sales from 40 to 45K to 75 to 80K in 3 years. I started having issues with closing management on shifts where I wasn't there. I'd get in at 6 a.m. to open, and the restaurant was left a mess and prep and stocking wasn't completed. I talked to the staff and tried to get them to help out, but I had no support and follow-through from the actual managers. This went on for weeks. Then one week, I was in at 5 for Friday brunch prep. I was prepping sheets of bacon and went to the back to pull the biscuits I had prepped the day before. I had left them on a speed rack. I found them on a shelf stacked on top of each other. The weight of the trays had smashed every biscuit into single sheets of dough on the lower trays. The speed rack had the dressings and cold items from the line closed the night before. I did about 90% of the brunch prep by the time the opening manager showed up at 8:30. We opened at 9. I told her what was left to set up the line. She asked why I was telling her. I laid the sheets of dough in front of her, dropped my keys on top, and walked out. I got nearly 50 calls from them that day and dozens of texts. I didn't respond to a single one. A few days later, the owner of the store called me and asked who he needed to fire to bring me back. I told him I'd pass and ended up finding another job in a day. A little over a year later, this restaurant shut down and was demolished to turn the space into a parking garage. I had a situation like this and I considered the offer for a second. But I thought, if they were actually going to fire them, they would have done so already. Especially since I had already complained numerous times and even brought it up with HR. It's all fluff, to get people to go against their own best interests. I wish every bad workplace story ended like this. Story 2. Over a decade ago, worked at Tim Hortons. Had been there 6 years on overnight shift. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. We were always understaffed. Usually just 2 people, one in the back, one at front of house. Of course, it is slower than during the day, that goes without saying, but there are fewer rushes when certain places close. Anyways, they hire back a guy who had previously been fired like 4 times for just not showing up. He was on the schedule on a Sunday morning with me. There was a 20 dozen donut order, and that was the day the freezer truck arrived and I put that away. I remember saying, if he doesn't show up, I'm probably just going home. Needless to say, he doesn't show up. Managers aren't picking up either. I think I stayed for a few hours, futilely trying to get everything done. I closed down the front and the drive-thru for what I intended to be a few hours to try to at least have the order ready for 6 a.m. But then a switch kind of flipped. I realized I wasn't going to be able to take any break the entire time. Somehow I'd have to figure out how to put away a freezer delivery, which arrives literally at 5 a.m., which is busy as hell, and I'd be doing that as well. The people that showed up in the morning would just do their usual bitching about stuff I wasn't able to do. I'd probably get written up again for some stupid reason or because I didn't do X or Y or whatever. And all this for like $10.50 an hour. I paused and asked myself, how long do I want to work here? And right then, a bunch of drunk kids were knocking on the door, apparently confused why the lights were off and the door was locked, because that's an enigma. I decided 6 years is enough and went home. I'm from Ontario, so I know what a late-night shift at Tim's looks like. Holy hell, 6 years. Typically, it's a gig that most people do for a year or 2 until they can move on to something else. Yeah, that was the original plan for me as well, which was probably part of it too. My supervisor there had a master's degree and only started working there until she got a job in her field, but had been there for like 20 years. The crazy thing is that my sleep schedule is still kind of fucked up from it over a decade later. Story 3. Dillard's. They told me to clock out and work all night because Regional was coming to inspect the store. So they wanted me to work for 8 hours moving around heavy stuff for free. Quit on the spot. Told me I wasn't a team player. I asked the manager if he would pay me for not working. He said no. I asked him why would I work without getting paid. That's highly illegal. I'm glad you quit. It's good more people are realizing they can quit rather than obey everything they are told. I got hired by Dillard's, but they kept pushing back my start date by weeks because the store owner was on vacation. And with my budget, I really need to stay working. They make a huge deal of starting you off a little above minimum wage and promising frequent raises and easy commissions. Talked to a friend who worked there before, and it sounded like they only start you off above minimum wage so they can give you a pay cut as soon as you miss a quota. I ended up starting another job while I was waiting for them. Story 4. Old sales job I had. Landed and closed a big deal, with a nice commission check heading my way. Found out a week or so later that the client wasn't mine. Therefore, the check would be going to the correct sales rep. The correct sales rep just happened to be related to the boss, and so they got a free commission check without ever lifting a finger. Left that day. Story 5. I worked in telesales when I was 16. Just a job for the summer. The company was selling marketing space and magazines for small construction companies, and my salary was commission-based. I decided to work smart, not hard, and approached a few bigger companies. After a few days, I was in contact with one of the biggest construction companies in my country and was closing a deal for a 2-page ad. Expensive ad, nice commission. My boss was happy, but told me that the deal was so big that one of the full-time employees would bring the deal home. They literally just made the last confirmation call and sent over the papers and took the commission. I did not turn up the next day. Friend of mine, 18 at the time, had the exact same situation happen to a T, but with a more petty and positive outcome. Fortunately for him, his dad worked in sales his entire life, so he knew how to navigate this. When he told his dad he had landed a major tech company for a full-print ad, think Microsoft Big, his dad told him to keep it a complete secret until the closing date. And if anyone, especially the senior sales reps, asked about anything, to just lie. He did all the contacting himself, and his dad helped him with all the paperwork and important phone calls. Luckily, he said no one really expected much from him, and thus didn't ever bother him. Day rolls around to finalize the deal. My friend does the closing call and sends the finalized and signed paperwork to be filed. Secretary in charge of filing and setting up commissions is flabbergasted, but files for the commission payment anyways. Boss sees it roll around his desk about 2 days later and is absolutely steaming. Fires my friend on the spot for risking such a big deal as a part-time child. Friend doesn't give two shits. Friend's dad had discovered that this particular company had a guaranteed on commissions, regardless of a change of heart for customers. Employer was legally required to pay him the commission, and on top of that, friend called the big company and told them he was fired, and they immediately pulled out of the ad. Ex-boss tried to sue him, but it went nowhere. Story 6. I was one of about 6 people working at a computer repair shop. Boss told us that anybody who passes the A+ certification test would get a $1 an hour raise. 6 people take the test, 5 pass it, and I got the highest score of us all. Boss didn't give me a raise because, you're a kid. What do you need with money? You gonna buy toys with it. I was about to be a senior in high school, 17 at the time. And yes, I quit on the spot and went to work for his competition for $2 an hour more than he was paying me. Story 7. My dad had cancer stage 4 lymphoma. We couldn't have our phones on the floor unless we filled out some paperwork with HR for emergencies. Asked my supervisor for the paperwork and he said, "Don't worry about it." Well, when his boss visited, he saw my phone and asked me about it, so I told the truth. My supervisor was pissed. A couple of weeks later, I get called into the HR office. My sister called to tell me my dad died. Supervisor wasn't there, but I left early. I took my bereavement and came back to work. My work bestie pulled me aside to tell me supervisor accused me of lying about my dad having cancer and dying to the entire team while I was gone. I hugged her and just left. Edit. This was 13 years ago almost. I was 20 and was out on my own for the first time in my life. He was probably 40-ish and very big and fat. No way I could have decked him. But wherever he is, fuck you, Casey. What the actual fuck is wrong with these people? Story 8. Verbal abuse from my boss. I'm an extremely patient person, but when every single word out of someone's mouth is berating and condescending, there's no price worth putting up with that and no reason to subject yourself to it for longer than necessary. Story 9. My dad died right before Christmas. I was already scheduled for a week off for family travel. HR said I could add 3 more days for funeral services so we could have it after the holiday. I came back and received a call from HR. The woman apologized and said she needed to ask, but would make it brief. She asked if my dad actually died. I told her yes, and she apologized again and said she didn't need anything else. Then the office manager called me into her office to tell me my boss had been telling people she thought I was faking it to get more time off. My boss was horrible in general and relied on me to do the majority of her work, which is what led her to creating the story about my dad not actually dying. She was hoping I'd be called back early from my trip. I had been interviewing for a job at another company and got an offer the day I got back. I called from my desk and accepted the offer, then packed my things and left. The same thing happened to me long ago as a young adult. All the employees ganged up on me in front of the boss when I got back. It was surreal. Thank goodness I had taken a bunch of death remembrance cards from the funeral home with the relative's same last name as mine. I started crying saying I can't believe they were doing this to me. Then I threw a handful of those cards at the lot of them. The boss picked one up and apologized. Then the others did the same. I told them to eat shit and I said I quit. Walked right out at the start of my shift. Story 10. I once worked as a landscaper, and during a slow month, some of us workers were asked to head to the boss's brother's property and help out there, which was fine. My boss asked that I pick him up in the morning and take him out there. The straw that broke the camel's back was while out there, I had filled some buckets with water, and while I did turn the tap off, it was slowly dripping. My boss noticed this and had a complete meltdown. He made threats to harm the person who left it dripping. He didn't know who it was at that point. I dropped my tools, told my boss to shove his threats, and left, leaving my boss in the middle of nowhere. Story 11. Did everything they wanted. Jumped on a plane to another site on one day's notice. Ended up working 16 days straight before coming back. Took a work-from-home customer service job role I didn't really want, just to help out on a temporary basis. We were told that half the team could have Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off, and the other half could have Christmas Day and Boxing Day. Except me, who could only have Christmas Day. I signed out of the VPN, call-blocked my managers, put my laptop in a box, and posted it to head office with my resignation letter inside it. Story 12. I put in that I needed off a particular weekend, 5 months in advance. That week comes and I'm on the bar schedule. I call and say, yeah, I can't work this. I have someone in town from across the country staying with me. I put in to have off 5 months ago. Manager replied, you put in a request off, and it's just that. A request. So even though I was seething angry, I said okay and then hung up. Day of the shift comes and I waited until 15 minutes before it started to leave a message thanking them for the opportunity to cover everyone else's shifts for 3 years, but I wouldn't be in ever again. I still joke to this day with my friend that I quit my job for her. Story 13. I used to work at IHOP in high school part-time. They were literally scheduling me during school hours and calling me when I wasn't showing up. I dropped off their stuff during the rush and left. I got hired at a grocery store once, and I told them explicitly that I was in college, and gave the manager my schedule, so he knew when he could and could not schedule me for work. He scheduled me during every class I had in the first week, and when I went to tell him this wouldn't work, he tried to talk me into dropping out of college. I quit right there. Story 14. I was working at Sears part-time for Christmas. They never trained me. When my supervisor came in for something and found out I was working alone, he ran out before they could ask him to help. My other supervisor had a nervous breakdown, and while crying, said he wanted to punch the manager, but was a felon and needed the job. I just got tired of the shit because I was literally just working for Christmas money. They found me at my other job and asked me to come back because I had figured out how to do the job without being trained. I said no, and they told me I'd never be able to work for Sears or Kmart again. Shiver me timbers. Story 15. I've only quit one job ever, in high school when I worked at a grocery store. But I quit after I somehow was the only person scheduled to work on a Saturday night. Like, literally the only person. I was 16 or 17. Granted, I lived in a small town, but being the only person working in a whole-ass grocery store. To emphasize, only person. Not a single other person was working. Not a janitor, not a manager, not a bag boy, no one else. It was just absurd. Never went back. Similar happened to me. I got a job at a gas station over Christmas. I'd been there a day, and I was scheduled to work Christmas Day. I didn't like it, but such is the job. I figured I'd be there with at least one other person, since I had very limited training on the register. Nope. Manager was in a huge hurry to leave as soon as I got there and laid the news on me that someone would be there with me, but about 5 hours from my start time. Don't worry. You won't be busy Christmas Day. You'll be fine. The store was pretty dead until about 4, then all hell broke loose. I had people lined up through the store, winding around the aisles, people trying to pay with checks, people buying lottery tickets, angry people just leaving money on the counter and leaving, people trying to get gas and having card issues. I was just hitting buttons on the register to get it to move on. I didn't give a fuck after trying to deal with this for an hour. To top it off, the person who was supposed to be in was late. I just about locked up and left, but she wandered in. As soon as she walked in, I fucking left. I just told her that register might be off, and I'm out. Never went back.